The story begins with the voice of the underground man, a bitter, disillusioned, and self-aware individual who retreats from society into a world of isolation and introspection. This first-person narrative opens not with the comforting rhythms of a conventional protagonist, but with a challenge to the reader. The underground man is different. He does not aspire to be liked or understood. He revels in his contradictions and even enjoys the pain he causes himself and others. His world is one of confusion, not enlightenment. And this is precisely where Dostoevsky's genius lies. The novel begins with the infamous declaration, "I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man. I think my liver is diseased." These lines are jarring, pulling the reader immediately into the troubled psyche of the underground man. They are not merely an introduction to his character, but a manifesto of his self-perception, laden with bitterness, confusion, and a perverse sense of pride. The starkness of his words, his immediate confession of illness and spite acts as a warning, almost daring the reader to engage with his narrative. It's a challenge, suggesting that what follows will not be an easy or pleasant journey. This opening serves as a hook, pulling us into the underground man's twisted world, where contradictions reign supreme and self-loathing becomes a form of self-expression. The very first sentence sets the tone for the rest of the novel, blending existential despair with sardonic humor. The underground man presents himself as a man who is fully aware of his flaws, yet takes a strange pleasure in articulating them. He doesn't seek sympathy. In fact, he actively repels it, presenting his illness, both physical and psychological, as a defining characteristic of his existence. The use of disease here is symbolic, a reflection of his decaying sense of self and his fractured relationship with the world around him. His liver, which he casually assumes to be diseased, becomes a stand-in for his overall state of being a festering, untreated ailment that he has chosen to live with rather than address. This opening also reveals the underground man's disdain for conventional values. By introducing himself as spiteful and unattractive, he defies the reader's expectations of a protagonist. He is not here to be liked or admired. Instead, he revels in his own degradation. His spite, like his illness, becomes a defining trait that separates him from others. In a society that values health, beauty, and kindness, the underground man stands apart, his illness and malice acting as badges of distinction. This is the crux of his alienation. He is simultaneously repulsed by and dependent on the very qualities that isolate him from the rest of humanity. Moreover, the first lines reveal the underground man's complex relationship with suffering. His claim that he thinks his liver is diseased, but refuses to seek medical help, speaks volumes about his attitude toward pain. He is aware of his suffering but chooses to wallow in it rather than seek a cure. This refusal to address his ailments is not born out of laziness or fear. It is a deliberate choice, a form of rebellion against the rationality of society. To seek treatment would be to acknowledge that life should be lived in a state of wellness and happiness, an idea that the underground man fundamentally rejects. His suffering becomes a source of identity, a way for him to distinguish himself from the masses who pursue happiness blindly. In this way, the first lines set the stage for one of the novel's central themes: the tension between action and inaction. The underground man is a man of thought, not of action, and his refusal to seek help for his diseased liver mirrors his broader inability to engage with the world. He would rather endure his suffering than take steps to alleviate it, as doing so would mean participating in a system of rationality that he despises. His spite, therefore, is not just directed outward, toward society, but inward, toward himself. This self-inflicted suffering becomes a way for him to assert his autonomy in a world that he feels is constantly trying to control him. These opening lines also offer a glimpse into the underground man's complex psychology. His declaration that he is sick and spiteful is both a confession and a provocation. He dares the reader to judge him, yet at the same time, he relishes in the certainty that no judgment could be harsher than his own. His spite is his weapon, but it is also his shield. a way of keeping others at a distance. By presenting himself as a deeply flawed individual, he ensures that no one will come close enough to truly understand him, let alone challenge his worldview. This is the paradox of the underground man. He craves understanding, but constructs his entire identity around being misunderstood. The first lines of Notes from Underground are an invitation into a world of contradictions, a world where the protagonist both longs for and rejects human connection, where suffering is both despised and embraced, and where the search for meaning is constantly undermined by the awareness of life's absurdity. In these few sentences, Dostoevsky introduces us to a man who is at war with himself, a man whose every action or inaction is dictated by the tension between his desire for freedom and his fear of vulnerability. These lines not only serve as the foundation for the underground man's character, but also encapsulate the central philosophical conflicts that will unfold throughout the novel. This paralysis, Dostoevsky suggests, is not the result of external oppression, but internal fragmentation. The underground man exists in a state of existential limbo, simultaneously craving and rejecting human connection. He is a man out of time, disengaged from the moral and social fabric of the society that surrounds him, and yet too aware to escape its influence. This internal conflict mirrors one of Dostoevsky's central concerns, the tension between free will and determinism. The underground man insists that he is a man of free will, choosing to live in defiance of societal norms and rationality. However, his actions, or rather, his inactions, betray a deeper existential truth. He is a slave to his consciousness, caught in the web of his own making. As we move through the narrative, the underground man's psychological state becomes both more disturbing and more relatable. He is not a monster, nor is he a hero. He is a man who has seen the world and found it wanting, yet has no idea how to improve upon it or live within its confines. This is Dostoevsky's critique of the modern human condition. The more we know, the less we can act. The underground man's tragedy is not that he is alone, but that he cannot accept or change his solitude. His intellect is both his gift and his curse, and it drives him deeper into a state of moral ambiguity and existential despair. Yet, despite his intellectual prowess, the underground man is fundamentally a coward. He spends much of his time railing against the deterministic philosophy of the 19th century rationalists, who believed that human behavior could be explained through logic and reason. The underground man hates this idea because it strips away the individual's freedom to act irrationally, to choose chaos over order, and to embrace suffering rather than happiness. But this hatred is hypocritical, as the underground man himself is incapable of genuine action. He talks, he contemplates, he agonizes over every decision. But when it comes time to act, he crumbles under the weight of his own scrutiny. The story transitions from abstract philosophical musings to the telling of concrete events in the second part of the novel. The underground man recounts two significant episodes from his past that illustrate his complex, contradictory nature. The first centers around his interactions with a group of former schoolmates. Full of resentment and bitterness, the underground man fantasizes about asserting himself over them. He devises intricate plans to exact revenge for slights, both real and imagined. But when the moment comes, he finds himself humiliated and overwhelmed by his own emotional intensity. Rather than gaining the power he so desperately craves, he is left feeling even more powerless. This chapter encapsulates Dostoevsky's exploration of human pride and humiliation. The underground man's sense of self is so fragile that he can neither endure insult nor rise above it. He is caught in a vicious cycle of wanting to belong and despising the very people he seeks approval from. His social isolation is both a defense mechanism and a form of self-punishment. In his mind, the world is divided into two camps: those who conform to society's norms, and those, like himself, who see through its absurdity, but are too weak to live authentically outside of it. The second chapter revolves around his encounter with a prostitute named Lisa. This interaction is pivotal, as it reveals the underground man's capacity for both cruelty and tenderness. Initially, he views Lisa as a symbol of everything that is wrong with a world debased, used, and discarded by society. In her presence, he feels superior, even as he recognizes the emptiness of this superiority. He offers her a vision of escape, telling her that she can still lead a meaningful life if she leaves her profession and seeks redemption. Yet, this offer of salvation is not genuine. The underground man is not interested in saving Lisa. He is interested in exerting power over her. As the interaction unfolds, his cruelty becomes more apparent. He manipulates her emotions, vacillating between kindness and malice, pushing her away even as he tries to draw her closer. In Lisa, we see a reflection of the underground man's own suffering, but rather than offering compassion, he seeks to impose his own despair onto her. When she responds with unexpected tenderness, offering him a glimpse of the human connection he so desperately needs, the underground man recoils in fear. He cannot bear the vulnerability that comes with genuine human intimacy, and in a final act of self-sabotage, he drives her away. This encounter with Lisa is one of the most profound moments in the novel, as it encapsulates Dostoevsky's exploration of the human capacity for self-destruction. The underground man's desire for control, for dominance, ultimately leads to his own undoing. He is terrified of love, not because he is incapable of it, but because it exposes the hollowness of his intellectual posturing. In Lisa, he sees the possibility of redemption, but that possibility is too terrifying to accept. To love someone else would mean relinquishing his control, and for the underground man, control is all he has. Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground can be read as a meditation on the limitations of reason and the dangers of excessive self-awareness. The underground man represents a kind of anti-hero for the modern age, a man who is too smart for his own good, yet too weak to live with the consequences of his intellect. His story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of alienation, not just from society, but from oneself. The underground man's refusal to engage with the world is not an act of rebellion, but an admission of defeat. He hides in his underground, not because he is superior to those above, but because he is afraid of what they represent: connection, vulnerability, and the possibility of meaning. At its core, Notes from Underground is a study of the human soul in crisis. The underground man is caught between two opposing forces: the desire for freedom and the fear of it. He rejects society's conventions, yet he cannot live outside of them. He despises human weakness, yet he is consumed by his own. Dostoevsky's portrayal of this inner conflict is both brutal and compassionate, revealing the depths of human despair, while also offering a glimpse of the possibility for redemption. The novel ends not with resolution, but with a lingering sense of ambiguity. The underground man is left alone, trapped in his own mind, unable to break free from the chains of his consciousness. His fate is uncertain, but what is clear is that his journey has not brought him any closer to peace or understanding. He remains an enigma, both to himself and to the reader. Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground is a profoundly psychological and philosophical exploration of the human condition. Through the character of the underground man, Dostoevsky delves into the complexities of self-awareness, free will, and the nature of human suffering. The novel is a stark reminder that knowledge, in and of itself, is not enough to bring about happiness or fulfillment. In fact, it may be the very thing that stands in the way. The underground man's story is a cautionary tale for those who seek to live solely within the confines of their own minds, disconnected from the world around them. It is a reminder that to be human is to be vulnerable, to be flawed, and to be connected to others, whether we like it or not. The true tragedy of the underground man is not that he is alone, but that he chooses to remain so. He retreats into his underground, not as an act of defiance, but as an admission of defeat. In his quest for freedom, he has imprisoned himself, and in doing so, he has lost the very thing that makes life worth living: the ability to connect, to love, and to be loved in return. This exploration of isolation, self-sabotage, And the human need for connection remains as relevant today as it was in Dostoevsky's time. The underground man's plight is universal, a reflection of the struggle we all face in balancing the desire for individuality with the need for belonging. In this sense, Notes from Underground is not just a novel. It is a mirror, reflecting the darkest corners of our own souls, and challenging us to confront the uncomfortable truths that lie within.